This seminar takes place as part of the first Global Evaluation Week, the combination of local and global, and local. During this week, public, private, and academic institutions that produce evaluations to strengthen development programs will be organizing a series of learning events around the world, and we are very happy to host the Rome event in IFAD. Before going any further, I would like to welcome two distinguished guests who will contribute to our debate today. Professor Pasquale Lucio Scandizzo from Fondazione Tor Vergata, and Professor David Zilberman from University of California, Berkeley. We are very honored to have you among us today. Thank you for coming. I would also like to welcome all the guests and colleagues who are following us via webcast. Impact evaluations are extremely important in development. As we all know, these evaluations play a key role in the drive for stronger evidence on results and effectiveness. Better evidence is needed to improve the understanding of causal relationships between interventions and their effects. Better evidence is needed to address the real challenges of rural poverty reduction. Better evidence is needed to inform policies, to have a much broader impact on rural youth and rural women around the world. Thanks to the robust methodology underpinning impact evaluations, they are well suited to provide such evidence. They are particularly effective to determine the direction and the magnitude of change in the lives of beneficiaries of rural development projects. For these reasons, IFAD has had increased its attention towards assessing impact. To this end, IFAD management implemented the Impact Assessment Initiative in 2011-2012 and continues doing so. And IOE has been engaged in the debate on impact evaluation since 2005. We were actively participating in the network of networks on impact evaluation. Some of you may remember NONI, through a passionate debate about the definition on impact, and has been systematically including impact evaluations in its product mix since 2013. And in 2015, we issued the second edition of the evaluation manual, where a dedicated chapter to impact evaluation was added. The rigorous methods adopted when conducting impact evaluations will depend on the evaluation questions and what are the answers that they aim to get at. Did the projects supported by IFAD fulfill their promises? What was the impact on rural people's incomes? Were they able to improve their productive assets? What was the most effective impact pathway to achieve an improvement in their dietary diversity? These are only a few of the key questions that can rely on impact evaluation to help to be answered. For IOE, engaging in impact evaluations has added value in many ways. First, it has provided the opportunity to test innovative methods for data collection and data analysis. Among these methods are satellite data usage for triangulation the results of household surveys, the use of SenseMaker to record stories of beneficiaries in a more effective and systematic way, and techniques like genetic matching, which gives superior matching results in quasi-experimental approaches in our evaluations. Second, it has allowed an active participation in national and international debates on impact evaluation, like this one. And third, it has helped us build capacities in undertaking impact evaluations in developing countries by supporting the CLEAR initiative in designing and delivering training programs. In 2018, in fact, IOE provided funding to develop the first edition of the impact evaluation course, which was successfully launched in Istanbul last month. In today's seminar, there will be two sessions. The first one on methodologies, processes, and lessons learned from impact evaluations. And the second one on challenges and innovations in the use of impact evaluations. The two sessions will serve to share important lessons on how to prioritize impact evaluations using different methods, explore the various options to aggregate findings across evaluations, and find innovative ways to overcome some of these challenges. More specifically, during the first session, we will learn about FAO's work related to social protection and resilience. We will also discuss IFPRI and IFAD's approaches in estimating project and corporate impacts. The second session will allow us to further discuss the use of evidence for policy making within different organizations. Finally, I hope that this seminar will only be the first of many joint initiatives in the field of impact evaluation, and I look forward to your active participation. Thank you for your attention and for being here today.
Thank you, Oscar, for your introduction. And Oscar and I decided to divide the opening and the closing. Therefore, my role will be to close the event with some concluding remark. In the meantime, I would like to say, before introducing our speaker, that I am extremely happy to host with Oscar this first seminar, joint seminar, IOE and RIA. You may want IOE, Independent Office of Evaluation, RIA, Research and Impact Assessment Division, two entities within the same institution. One is external, the other one is internal, because we're trying together to work hard to make sure to be able to use the evidence to report impact to our stakeholders, namely the board and also the donor's country and also the overall donor. How can you deliver evidence? You can deliver good evidence only if you make all the stakeholders working together. Who are the stakeholders? The producer and the user of analytical research. So once you produce data, you have to be able to use the data and to disseminate those data. With this spirit, IOE and RIA decided together to organize this first seminar to showcase what here in Rome, the Rome-based agencies are producing. So, and we also decided to invite some external fellows from the university, Professor Zilberman and Professor Scandizzo, to help at closing this bridge between producer and user of evidence. And so let me introduce you the first speaker of the first session, and please can you join us here in the front row. So the first session, which will last 1 hour from 2:15 to 3:15, will be animated by Mr. Alan Debroux, who is connected from Washington, D.C., from IFPRI, then Noemi Pace, Alessandra Garbero, and Pasquale Lucio Scandizzo. Can you please come here in the front for your presentation? So to briefly introduce the speaker, Alan is Senior Research Fellow in the Market, Trades and Institution Division. He has a PhD in Agriculture and Resource Economics from UC Davis, and prior to joining IFPRI, Alan was Assistant Professor of Economics at William College. Noemi Pace is Assistant Professor at the University of Ca' Foscari in Venice, and she's also consultant for FAO. Noemi holds a PhD in economics from the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and besides collaborating with FAO, she also collaborates with, among others, Stanford University. Rebecca Pietrelli. Rebecca Pietrelli is an economist at the Agriculture Development Economic Division since 2014. And before joining FAO, she was research fellow at Roma Tre University with the Food Secure Research Project. She has a PhD in economics from La Sapienza University of Rome and a master in development economics from Sussex University. Alessandra Garbero is the senior econometrician of RIA, Research and Impact Assessment Division of IFAD. Her work focused on impact assessment methodologies and applied econometrics. She obtained her PhD in epidemiology and population health from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Pasquale Lucio Scandizzo is my former mentor, my former supervisor at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and I'm sorry to start introducing you like that, but I am extremely proud of this background. And he's also currently the advisor of the Italian Ministry of Economy and Finance. He's also a member of the Fondazione Tor Vergata Economia and also of the ICABR, which is the International Consortium on Applied Bioeconomy Research. He has a long-standing history of collaboration with the World Bank, FAO, and all the major international organizations, and a strong record of publication in agriculture and development economics. So all the speakers will have 12 minutes for presentation, and I will just show the 1 minute left before the end of each presentation. So Alan, the floor is yours. After this session, we will have another session, and this will be followed by Q&A and some closing remarks. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I apologize for not being able to be there. And I titled my talk, I thought it would be most interesting to talk a bit about lessons learned, as I've been managing impact evaluations industry for about 13 years now. And so there are a lot of lessons that I've learned over the years. And in that, I'll talk a bit about methodologies and things that we should be aware of when we are when we're managing impact evaluations. Before I do that, I want to just talk very briefly, since I only have 12 minutes, about why impact evaluation is important. It can be a credible way of measuring benefits of specific types of investments, and that can be public or private. We know that private companies can be doing impact evaluations all the time on us, particularly I'm thinking
Alan, sorry to interrupt you, but I have no way to show you my little sign with 1 minute. In interest of making everybody speaking within the time that we have, I kindly ask you to finalize your presentation within the next minute. Sorry for this. Thank you, Alan, for your presentation. And now the floor is to Noemi Pace and Rebecca Pietrelli. So you both you're sharing a presentation of 12 minutes each, so I'll let you decide how you're going to share the time. But please make sure to follow the schedule, because both 12 minutes, yes.
So each? In total. Okay.
In total, because the
Okay.
session lasts 1
Okay.
hour, so we have
Okay.
4 presentations. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to do my best. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Noemi Pace. I work in the social protection team in the Social Policies and Rural Institution Division in FAO. Today, I would like to talk about the household individual level productive impacts of social cash transfer in sub-Saharan Africa. And the materials that we present today is part of the transfer project. This is why we have this logo on the top right, and also part of the From Protection to Production project, which was on the orange bar, but you couldn't see it, but this is from the project. Now, let me give you very quickly some background, and then I go immediately to the methodologies and quick to the results. So social protection policies continue to expand across sub-Saharan Africa. Without going into the detail of these slides, let me show you this graph, which is really powerful. So here we have, on the left-hand side, the number of new programs starting in 1950 up to 2016, and the number of new countries that start to implement social protection intervention. And you could see that there is a continuous increase of both new programs and also new countries. This was quite regular, but then you can see that between 2007 to 2010, the number of both new countries and also the number of new programs increased dramatically. And this is the period in which the transfer project start to be active. In fact, the transfer project started in response to the need to provide some evidence on the impact of social protection intervention, in particular unconditional cash transfer program, in the sub-Saharan context. There was already evidence on other regions in the world, especially Latin America, but almost no evidence at all on Sub-Saharan Africa. So the transfer project started exactly to respond to this need. So what is the transfer project? It's a group of people interested in learning about the impact of cash transfers in Sub-Saharan Africa. Most of them, if not all, are unconditional cash transfer. The three main entities involved in this project are UNICEF, which serves as a kind of on-the-ground social protection partner for government, the FAO headquarters and country offices, where we do especially analysis on the productive impacts of social protection interventions, and also the University of North Carolina and other research groups. Those are the countries within the transfer project, so mostly Sub-Saharan African countries and Eastern countries. What I would like to talk more about is the From Protection to Production project, which is within FAO and is a key component of the transfer project. What we do within FAO is to do impact evaluation of unconditional cash transfer, focusing on the impact of these programs on productive activities and increase in income multiplier. So the idea is to see how cash transfer program can affect productive activities and therefore to have a positive impact on sustainable economic growth. And most of the programs evaluated are governmental interventions. Those are the countries including the transfer in the from protection to production programs. So why we are interested on productive impacts, and then I go to the key to the core of the presentation. The idea is that transfers can relax liquidity, can relax many constraints, for example, lack of access to credit, lack of insurance, and in this way can cope with market failure. So productive impacts are expected to have productive effect, also impacting on, on nutritional status. All the results, most of the results are included in this book, From Evidence to Action, the story of cash transfers and impact evaluation Sub-Saharan Africa. Let me go directly on the methodology, because this is really key in our team, and also linked to the presentation of Alan. In our impact evaluation analysis, we adopt a mix and method strategy that consists in three key components: a microeconometric approach, a qualitative analysis, and a general equilibrium model. So microeconometric approach consists on ex post evaluation of the programs, comparing a sample of beneficiary households or individuals, depending on the case. So this is the treatment group, vis-a-vis a sample of similar households that did not receive the program. This is the comparison group. And we also do qualitative analysis consisting mainly on interviews of key informants, on focused group discussion, and on the analysis of specific case studies. The third component is the general equilibrium model that consists basically on looking at the impact to not direct beneficiaries, but we look in this case to spillover effect and income and production multiplier. So why these are three components, and why this mix and method approach is very important, because in this way we are able to triangulate the information that we get from each of the components, and to have information not only on the impact of the direct beneficiaries, but also impact on the non-beneficiary households and individuals living within the same communities. I skip the results, but just to show you. So even without going into the details, this graph shows the impact of unconditional cash transfer program on food and security, food and nutrition security. Several indicators of food and nutrition security, spending on food and quantity consumed, frequency and diversity of food consumption, and food consumption behavior. Without going into the details of each country, you see that most of the impacts are green, which means positive impact and protective impact. The black sign means not significant impact. Just to conclude, there is a new round of evidence. In particular, we focus on the impact evaluation of cash plus interventions, and in doing so, we are also trying to adopt other methodologies. For example, we recently implemented laboratory experiments in the field. We are interested in evaluating climate shock responsive social protection, nutrition-sensitive social protection, gender-sensitive social protection, and we focus on the analysis of child labor. We also increase the geographical representation, focuses not only in Africa, but also in Latin America and East Europe. Thank you. These are the link if you want more information.
Thank you, Noemi. And now Rebecca from FAO as well.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. And I'm Rebecca Pietrelli from the Resilience Index Measurement and Analysis team at FAO, in short, the RIMA team. And it's a pleasure for me to be here and to share with you some RIMA experience for impact evaluation. So RIMA is a quantitative tool that allows you to estimate resilience capacity at household level. And this tool can be used for multiple purposes, for targeting, for programming, for monitoring, as well for impact evaluation. And in this presentation focuses on where and where RIMA is used for impact evaluation, how the RIMA tool can be applied to impact evaluation with an example to the Lesotho Child Grant Program, the partners we are working with, and the main challenges and goal we face and we would like to achieve. So, first of all, when and where the RIMA tool is used for impact evaluation. There are three main cases, three main scenarios. First of all, enhancing resilience strategies. These are multi-agency efforts aimed at increasing the resilience of beneficiary household. Some examples can be joint resilience strategy in Dolo region of Somalia, in Borno State, Nigeria, in Karamoja region of Uganda, as well as the resilience initiative in DRC, Niger, and Somalia by FAO, IFAD, and World Food Programme. Second case can be the case of tailored and focused project or interventions aimed at increasing resilience. Under the Global Network Against Food Crisis program, the so-called Pro-Resilience Action Mechanism Fund will support 12 countries in enhancing resilience interventions. And all these countries are going to use the RIMA tool for measuring the impact of this intervention on the resilience of beneficiary household. Finally, social protection programs, as Noemi was saying before, they have a direct impact on the welfare of beneficiary household, but they also can have impact on the resilience capacity of the beneficiary household. This map shows you the coverage of the RIMA analysis for impact evaluation, both ongoing and finalized. And the majority of them are under the PRO-ACT interventions. So, and they are all ongoing. How RIMA is used for impact evaluation? So RIMA is a tool that allows the estimation of an indicator called Resilience Capacity Index at household level using household level dataset and latent variable models. In the first step, the so-called pillars of resilience are estimated through factor analysis from observed variables. And these 4 pillars of resilience are access to basic services, asset, social safety nets, and adaptive capacity. And they are all estimated through factor analysis using observed variables. In a second step, a multiple indicator, multiple causes model, which is a specific type of structural equation model, is used for estimating the resilience capacity index by taking into account by using the pillars and the food security indicators. So after the resilience capacity index and the pillars are estimated, they can be used as outcome of interest for impact evaluation, in addition to food security indicators and observed variables. As an example of the use of the RIMA methodology for impact evaluation, a recent study conducted by FAO in joint collaboration with IFAD assesses the impact of the Lesotho Child Grant Program on the resilience of beneficiary households and investigates the drivers of the resilience changes and the heterogeneity of the effect. This program is an unconditional cash transfer program implemented by the Ministry of Social Development in Lesotho. The data used in this analysis is a panel dataset, including baseline and follow-up dataset, and that are part of a randomized control trial. After the estimation of the resilience capacity index using the RIMA methodology, a difference in difference approach has been applied to estimate the effect of this program on the resilience of beneficiary household. Different methods have been used for the estimation of the RCI with and without sample weights, and as you can see from this summary table, the program has a positive and significant effect on the resilience of beneficiary household, and the effect is robust, taking into account different methods of estimation. I skip this. This study is an example of partnership for us because the study has been conducted in collaboration with IFAD, and the partners at global level are UN agencies, European Union, World Bank, ODI, IFPRI, USAID, Food Security Information Network Initiative. Then at regional level, they are mainly IGAD, Resilience Analysis Unit, SILS, and African Union. And finally, at country level, we mainly work with national statistical offices, university, and food security clusters. To conclude, I would like just to list the challenges we are facing when we conduct RIMA impact evaluations. They are mainly confoundedness with other projects, attrition, and this is mainly because we work in conflict and post-conflict areas, so it's really challenging for us to follow the same households over time. The definition of the comparison group, the interpretation of the results. Finally, our main long-term goal is that we would like to integrate our analysis in a monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems that aims at informing and guiding future intervention and future actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And now it's Alessandra Garbero, a presentation by RIA. IFAD.
Do you mind if I move there, because a bit, do you mind? Sorry, it's just I'm going to stand. Thank you. Here's the presentation is coming up, I guess. So now we move to a completely different topic, and we talk about the estimation of corporate impact and the RIA strategy for estimated corporate development impact. Anyway, so basically my presentation, I'm going to talk about two main building blocks, which is the IFAD impact assessment strategy and then the corporate impact methodology. So in a nutshell, what is the RIA IFAD impact assessment strategy, right? This is for IFAD 10. So there are three main pillars. The first one is a careful review of the portfolio. Basically, this helped us pretty much inform the criteria for selecting our impact assessments. So we reviewed the portfolio, and basically we, based on our strategic objectives, we linked indicators to the SDGs, and then we set targets at the beginning of the cycle. Then this review of the portfolio really helped us really inform the selection strategy, and we selected 15% of the portfolio projects to undergo an impact assessment. We decided to focus on ex-post impact assessment, so snapshots at the end of a project, and the criteria what we used to select the impact assessment was basically we wanted to learn. So from IFAD 9 to IFAD 10, we really shifted from accountability to learning. They have to be feasible, meaning impact assessments are costly, so we need to provide learning and be feasible from an implementation perspective. We needed buy-in. We've done it in collaboration with the partners. So what Alan de Brouw was saying, having buy-in, having collaboration, we try to establish that at the beginning of the cycle. And the good thing is that by doing this review of a portfolio, we're really representative of a portfolio distribution of projects or IFAD. That are basically by project type and by region. And then the end, it's a third pillar, which is really this corporate reporting. So we go beyond individual impact assessment to basically say something about aggregate development effectiveness, to what extent IFAD can be accountable pretty much on reporting on the core strategic objective. And we do an exercise for which it actually projects the impact from individual projects to the entire portfolio of the projects. And the outcome is the impact assessment report that is presented to the board regularly at each cycle. And now, in a nutshell, the impact methodology, the corporate impact, from the beginning to the end. I already mentioned that there is a review of a portfolio. We select the projects. Among project closing or completing during IFAD 10, then select 15%. We do impact assessment on those, pretty much, and we come up with estimates of impact. Then we do a meta-analysis, which I'm going to talk later, which is the process for aggregating all these studies, and then we project. And then we come up with this X million number of people impacted, which is actually our impact metric at the end, which we'll report to the board. So I'm now going to talk a bit about point 3, which is the estimates of impact. So we're going to do project level impact evaluations or impact assessments. So these are 17 as part of IFAD 10. They're rigorous, meaning they're the counterfactual. They use mixed methods. They use non-experimental methods. And the key requirement of these studies is that they have to have a very strong internal validity, meaning they need to have a valid counterfactual. They have to be free from selection biases based on observable and unobservables. They need to address all the confounding factors, address spillovers, and so forth. And the last important point is external validity. Not only they have to be internally valid, but also externally valid. And our impact assessment have been using large samples that are representative of project areas. Sometimes we did listing exercises to establish rigorous sampling, sometimes informed by GIS with remote sensing to even become even more accurate about how to select the population that ended up in our sample. And on top of that, are representative of the portfolio. So it's a double criteria for external validity. And this is basically the methodological flow diagram, right? We aggregate the results through meta-analysis, and then we project them. But what is meta-analysis? Meta-analysis is our aggregation methods, is very well known in the epidemiological literature. It's really a powerful tool to combine estimates from different studies. It is used in medicine to evaluate the effectiveness and the impact of drugs. So specifically for randomized trials, and they basically, there is always normally what they do, they look at studies from the same intervention to address the same condition, and they try and come up with an effect size, with a standardized metric across all these studies. And it's really powerful because it really mix, as we say, apples and oranges, and that's why what is practically used in medicine, so it's quite reliable. I talked about effect size. So basically, we take our impact estimates and we need to standardize them. So the effect size is really the metric, the unit of currency of the meta-analysis. And that's what it reflects, the strength of the effect and the magnitude of the effect. And it's very important to compute this carefully. So the metrics are many and depends on the nature of the variable. They can be binary or continuous. Without being too technical, we choose response ratios because they were the most appropriate for the purpose for IFAD 10. So in terms of aggregation steps, normally a meta-analysis starts with the study selection. This is because, as you can imagine, like the number of studies that go into enter a meta-analysis can be very different. Some are less rigorous than others. So normally there is a study selection, which is called, through a criteria which is called PICOS, which is participant, intervention, comparison, outcomes, and study design. We didn't do the study selection because all our impact assessments are 17. They are rigorous. They have a high degree of quality. They all basically there is a very high bar for assessing confounders. So in the end, when they were critically appraised, which is the second step, they turned out to be of high quality. Compared with IFAD 9, where they had more studies, but of dubious quality, because some of them were outsourced to different partners, and we had to basically give a ranking for the quality of the impact assessment. Then the third step is really doing a portfolio coding, which is looking at the entire projects that actually enter in the first step in the review, and trying and see the project type and extracting useful characteristics like project types and number of beneficiaries. Then the other step is the extraction of parameters to be used in the effect size calculation. These parameters are the impact estimates from the individual impact assessment that have to be put together to compute the overall effect size or overall estimate of impact. And then, therefore, we have the effect size calculation, and then we do an initial meta-analysis to compute with overall effect size, and eventually we can also, if we have other variables, we can also look by project type or subgroups. So there are two methods for doing this aggregation based on the meta-analysis. Okay, we have fixed effects and random effects that have different assumptions about the distribution of the impact. And they have different weighting criteria. Normally, what a good analyst would do a sensitivity analysis to the inclusion or exclusion of the studies. What happened? Is the impact, the overall impact estimate robust? And there are some also things that need to be done, but basically to when there are multiple estimates from the same studies to put it together, and some corrections based on unit of analysis. When, for instance, studies report impact estimates at the different level to which they were supposed to be, right? Village instead of household, for instance. And the final step, and I'm almost there, is the projection, which is an extra step. So we said that we need to do an extrapolation of a projection of this corporate impact to the entire portfolio, to the universe population. And this entails defining the universe. The universe is a universe of all IFAD 10 projects, of project completing during IFAD 10, which are about 100, and implies basically identifying the outreach which is the number of beneficiaries within all these projects of IFAD 10. And then once we are clear about this, we can do the projection and obtain the number of people impacted across the portfolio, which is our impact metric. So we need to keep in mind 5 elements of this, which is the breadth of impact, the number of people who benefit. These are different from the outreach, because the outreach is whom we reach. We may not benefit all equally. So this is just number of people benefit is actually a different thing and needs to be calculated. Then there is a benefit, which is actually the global impact, say, on production. Then there is the distribution of benefits, which is basically how they are distributed in the entire population of project. This is an unknown, so we need to make assumption about this. Then we need a benefit threshold. We need to assume that everybody is above 20% with benefits. And then there is generalizability, which is to what extent you can generalize from the individual impact assessment, which is a long shot, because basically, like, you're going to say that one estimate applied to a different context. So, in conclusion, this is really an ambitious exercise, which is transparent and makes IFAD the sole IFI that is actually goes from individual impact assessment to corporate impact assessment, an estimate of corporate impact. So, as far as IFAD 10, the aggregation, it is true that it relies on fewer studies, 17 versus 24, but they have higher quality. Some of IFAD 9 didn't enter the aggregation. The methodology is transparent. There is this issue of generalizability, which is based on the external validity of the studies that are representative of the portfolio. There is a large debate in the literature on to what extent one can transfer an impact estimate from one context to another. But it's an important tool to, this aggregation allow one to validate the targets. It's an accountability tool in front of the donors and the board. And the last is that we don't need a randomized controlled trial to do this. We just need rigorous, counterfactual-based ex-post impact assessments and the critical mass of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. And now the last speaker of the session, and then this will be followed by a couple of Q&A before we start the second session. So, Pasquale Lucio Scandizzo, the floor is yours for some comments.
Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation and for inviting me. I am very interested in this presentation and in general in impact analysis. In fact, one of my responsibilities is to introduce impact analysis in the Italian government, which is a real challenge. Now, impact analysis actually in economics is a very old problem, and it started when the definition of national statistics, and in particular, it was at the center of the debate on cost-benefit analysis, which at the beginning of cost-benefit analysis, in fact, there was a strong disagreement between two schools of thought. One, which was the French school of thought, two economists, Proulx and Chervel. Sarah knows very well because her father was involved with them. And Bella Balassa, who was the World Bank instead voice, and also Little and Merlis and so on. And Proulx and Chervel said, well, thought that it was not good to have just one monetary indicator for project worth, and in fact would be much better to have a range of indicators. And in fact, they called their methods the effects method. And why the proponents of cost-benefit analysis thought it was okay to look at effects, but eventually, everything had to be monetized and synthesized in one indicator, which was the net present value. Now, this echoed that similar result to the difference of opinion between Simon Kuznets on one hand and the proponents of the GDP techniques, which ended up with the winners of the GDP approach, which is the power of a single number. So this is the origin of the debate. Now, after many years in which actually cost-benefit analysis established itself as the main force of the economists, the main stronghold of the economists on the evaluation of the performance, impact analysis is making a very strong return, in part because we have many more data, in part because investors are, there is a whole range of new investment ventures, which is called impact investment, impact finance, actually. In fact, OECD just published a guide on impact financing, which essentially, testifies of the increasing importance that people, that the operators actually, give to the impact, the intended impact. That is the connection between what they do and what they intend to do, or what they intend to pursue. And then there is corporate impact, and there are all sorts of other impact evaluations. In fact, impact evaluation, which originally was mainly directed to evaluate objects, is increasingly directed to evaluate subjects like corporations or even states and so on, because it's essentially as their intentional agents, then they have impact on the question of what impact they have on their environment, or whether their intentions are reflected in results, becomes really a very important one. This said, there are several problems with impact evaluation. Some of them are general economic, perhaps even philosophical problems. Some of them are methodological problems. I would like to touch them because I think it's important to be aware of them. First problem is, when we're saying impact evaluation, typically we tend to think that we want to measure the outcomes in terms of results of a program or of the intended action of an agent. But this is not true. I mean, this is philosophically wrong because essentially confuses the impact of the product with the impact on the process. We are interested both on the impact on the product and the impact on the process. If we were not interested in the impact on the process, for example, religion would be a completely impactless activity. And we cannot, I mean, we wouldn't be able even to ask the question, can we do a randomized trial to understand or to test whether prayer works? Or something like that. But the impact of religion on the behavior of people is very important. So it's a self-enforcing ethical process, which is very important. Also for a corporation, this is very important. I mean, the corporation may have, I mean, do we prefer a dissolute corporation which achieves great results, or an ethical corporation which does not achieve any result, achieves much lower results in terms of objective impact? Of course, part of the impact of the corporation, which should be measured, it's the improvement of its impact on society through example, through extension of ethical behavior, through direct and indirect influence. So when we measure the impact, we should always be aware that one big, I mean, in particular, for instance, for RIFAD and corporate impact is very important. We should be aware that one of the main questions should be the process in addition to the product. This is generally not considered because we have always in mind this logical framework, which was an illusion at some point of project evaluation. Logical framework says that you can frame a project with 4 main components, which are essentially activities, inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And at some point, somebody said, well, impact evaluation means that you have to concentrate on outcomes, forget about the other things. But you cannot forget the other things because outcomes do depend on the other things. So question is, we should keep in mind all those 4 things when we do outcome evaluation, impact evaluation. Don't do only outcome evaluation. Outcome evaluation is merely target monitoring, is not real impact evaluation. The other problem is, what does impact evaluation mean? So there are two basic definitions which are often confused. They are not necessarily wrong. Neither of them is necessarily wrong or right. But we have to be careful. I mean, we are aware of the fact that these definitions are different. I mean, one definition is the one of the effects. I was telling before that is the Brouwer-Chervel frame. That is all effects, short and long term, intended or unintended, of an action from a subject, or of a serious action from a subject, of the behavior of a subject. So this is one definition. Another definition is whether a particular program or project is effective in achieving a specific set of subjects. It's a very different question. Okay? I mean, the second question is more a question, I mean, it's close, but it's not the same thing to the question of attribution, which is typical of pharmaceutical research. That is, we want to know whether a positive effect is due to a placebo or to a specific medicine. Now, the question of attribution is not the same thing as the impact evaluation, but one of the methodologies, the one that is considered more rigorous, which is randomized control trial, essentially confuses the two questions and is often used in a confused way to argue in favor either of a large impact or in favor of a significant attribution, which we know econometrically also are two very different questions. So the impact can be two different things, or these are two extremes. That is all. We want to describe all the effects, or maybe measure all the effect, or we want to see whether one specific effect is achieved. But also attribution is not the same thing, and in particular, we have to be careful not to confuse attribution with sole attribution. Sole attribution means that we identify the cause of a single effect. Okay? Like, for instance, we have a motion, like in physics, we have a motion, an object that is not, well, essentially is an inertia. If you give him a push, then the sole attribution is the fact that you've given a push to that option. But in practice, in most cases, I mean, we are unable methodologically, because of identification problem, to identify sole attribution. And how much? 1 minute? Okay, I'm finished. So to be careful in applying all these methodologies, particularly randomized control trials, because they give the illusion very often of being able to solve the problem of attribution and even worse, sole attribution, without having really the numbers. Finally, the other thing we should be aware of is that the counterfactual is important. I mean, what the impact valuation brings to the fore, and I think this is a very important advance with respect to project evaluation, is the importance of the counterfactual, which is also present in cost-benefit analysis, but very often essentially ignored, because the benefits of project are identified in an incremental way, also the costs. But in impact evaluation, you cannot do that. You have to have explicit counterfactual. And this counterfactual can be both produced by a control group, but this is not necessarily the best way all the time. Sometimes it is the best way, but many times it's not the best way because there is no acceptable control group, either if it is not feasible or because the control group that could be acceptable would not be a rigorous counterfactual. Instead, economic models are able to produce a series of counterfactuals. They often are a much better alternative to the randomized control trial control groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your lectures on evaluation. And I have to say, some of the concepts that you have listed, you were telling to me long time ago when I was doing both my undergraduate thesis and then PhD thesis. But at the time, I didn't have the means to understand their practical application. And now I have more. What I can say before leaving the floor to the audience for Q&A is that your discussion really aimed the goal that Oscar and I had, which was to stimulate the debate on the importance of impact assessment. And also, and to hear different perspectives, both from international organizations and also from independent institution and also from the academia, when the academia would give the frontier of what is studied or what is done in the area of development. So now, before, I think we need also a break or a few minutes for a coffee. So I think we can have 10 minutes of discussion for some questions to avoid to have the questions at the end of the seminar and to fear or preventing you to remember some of the fresh thought that this first session gave you in terms of discussion. So I leave the floor for discussion. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Alejandro Greenspoon from FAO, and I have some questions for Alessandra. I found very interesting the presentation, and actually we are grappling, not at the corporate level, but within the division that I am a part of, which is Social Policies and Rural Institutions in the Economics Department. We're grappling with the issue of how we assess the impact of our own interventions. Yeah. So the team that I am a part of, together with Noemi, we look at the impacts of outside interventions, meaning interventions by mostly government programs, and we're informing them and providing technical assistance and helping generate the evidence. But the question is, okay, are we being ourselves effective? are we having impact ourselves? We can tell about the impacts of those government programs, but we are discussing those. So in that context, I found it very interesting and would like to learn more, but I have 3 questions, or just 3 points. One is the issue of, I may have missed them in the presentation, one is the issue of the independence. So you are assessing your own corporate performance, which is, if I understood correctly, which is fine, but a question of independence and objectivity, or to what extent, if or when you involve others, outsourcing or subcontracting that can provide an independent view of how the organization is performing. The secondly is the question of attribution that was raised here, the extent to which you're able to tell, well, this was our impact and can be attributed to us as IFAD, when so many others may have been involved in some of these projects, I suppose. And the last one is the question of effectiveness or cost effectiveness, but effectiveness. You are able to assess that you had a positive impact of a certain magnitude in some type of projects, let's say. How do you evaluate whether the same or better results could have been achieved more effectively or more cost effectively? Thank you.
To me, there are 3 questions that are really important. First, before you do the cost effectiveness, to what extent do you use theory? To what extent do you use theory? Generally speaking, people have comparative statics and other things that they raise some hypotheses about what will happen. And it seems to me that it's almost theory-free, and that's really one thing. Secondly, to what extent you speak with the people that designed the experiment, and what was their purpose, what was their problem, what were their challenges. Like, I think about, suppose you do a student evaluation of a department, I never saw it, there's very little quantitative analysis, mostly you speak with people. To what extent you speak with people. And the third thing, I'll speak a little bit about it later on. Meta-analysis basically take a lot of projects that relate to different size of population, and they have different. And do you use some weights based on the population side, or you basically look at one number? Because that's what I find in meta-analysis. You run a regression, but you basically have different values.
Hi to Noemi and Rebecca. I'm Elizabeth Ver from NEN. 2 questions. The first one is, if and how do you factor in the administrative cost of cash transfer programs? And the second is the issue of beneficiaries and double counting. How do you make sure that the same people are not counted more than once?
Okay, so I think we can start with the answer from this first round of questions. Maybe I should officially answer to the first one. So to distinguish. So we are not independent. Actually, we are internal, and we depend on the other division. Why? Because our ultimate goal as research and impact assessment with the corporate reporting is to inform on the design of future projects. So to intervene in the ex-ante step of projects design, which is when you design a project to be implemented in the field, is we learn by doing. By conducting this impact assessment, we look at what went well based on our strategic objective, which are increased production, increased market access, strengthening relation, but also, and more importantly, to look at what didn't go well, to try to understand how the outcome would have been even larger than what it has been by understanding the problems of the project implementation and on the project design. So that's why we conduct this impact assessment at the end of a replenishment period, which Alessandra has called, in this case, IFA 10, which is the period between 2012 and 2015 and 2018, because we are now discussing with the other division, and in particular with the regions, to try to increase this dialogue, to influence, to give them lessons learned from the previous project implementation. So we are not external, we are internal, with the ultimate purpose of inform the other division.
Yes, thank you, Alejandro, for the question. And indeed, following the operational model of international financial institution, IFAD has a self-evaluation system complemented by an independent evaluation system. In the case of what Alessandra has presented is the self-evaluation, and in IFA, in 2 occasions, every 3 years, the independent office of evaluation reviews the work done by this division and presents its review to the board as an independent voice, speaking about the internal and external validity of the findings of this exercise, and making some methodological comments for improving the capacity of the institution from learn from these exercises. Thank you for your question.
So I'll complement the question vis-à-vis the attribution, right? So by the virtue of using counterfactual methods, we are able to establish attribution, right? So our impact assessments have this objective. They are rigorous precisely because we want to know whether any project actually contributed to an increase in income or increase in agricultural production and further along the way poverty reduction even. Regarding the question of cost effectiveness and cost benefit analysis, we haven't done it. So this require careful cost data, possibly by components and subcomponents to know, and also like that impact assessment carefully evaluates each of the components and alternatives. So this is best done, as you know, in an ex-ante framework at the beginning, right, when you have different intervention and to see what is the more cost-effective at generating the same outcome or impact. Regarding the question by Professor Zilberman, again, are these theory-free? In theory, this impact assessment that we do are theory-based impact assessment, because at the beginning, actually, we reconstruct the theory of change in collaboration with implementers and the people who designed the intervention, if they're still there. Also because we need to be theory-based, because we arrive at the end of a project, right? So we are agnostic. We don't know anything. We arrive at the end. Many things happen over time. So in some instances, the intervention change over time. So actually, in our impact assessment cycle that we didn't explain, we have a very important phase, which is this inception mission or the scoping mission, where we go in country and actually establish dialogue to come up with, to have some hypothesis of what caused what throughout the length of a IFA project that we know are quite long. They are on average 6.5 years. So we need to reconstruct some things. I always call this ex post a bit of autopsy, right? So you're at the end, it's like a kind of a cadaver. You need to dissect and understand what is going on so far. So ideally, we should do an ex-ante design, start from the beginning, but we don't have the means, because precisely for corporate reporting, we need to report in the short of 3 years. So we need to do this ex post and arrive at the end. So, but their theory, they're full of theory pretty much, because we try to establish at least in terms of the theory change from inputs to outcomes and impacts. And in terms of meta-analysis, the question of the weight is very important. I went very fast on fixed effects and random effects. We do have weights, and there are different assumptions of the weights. The weights are based on the sampling and the population, and it's inverse of the variance. In the fixed effects, we're only one source of variance, because the assumption is there is a true mean of effect and then like a variance. The random effects assumes 2 variances, 2 sampling errors pretty much. And the random effects, it basically assumes a distribution of effects. So there is not only one true effect. And this is what applies to IFAD, because we have many project types, and basically, and also geographies. So it cannot be an only one estimate for east of agricultural production, right? It has to vary by project type and some other factors that can be measured or unmeasured. So we take that into account.
Okay, let me answer first to you. Regarding the potential exposure to other programs, we try to take into account this as much as we can. In the main survey instruments, we usually have a module which asks whether the same household is also beneficiary of other social protection interventions, or also pension schemes or agricultural interventions. So we try to take into account this as much as we can, controlling for inclusion in other government projects. And just to give you an example, we were analyzing the impact of the social cash transfer in Malawi. Through the questionnaire, we discovered that many of the households that were part of the comparison group were actually beneficiary of the farm input subsidy program. And this structure actually suggests us to do a study in which we consider 4 treatment arms, a group of households that only receive the social cash transfer, a group of households that only receive the farm input subsidy program, a group of households that receive both, and then the comparison group. And rebalancing the sample, we were able to evaluate the standalone impact of the 2 programs and also the joint impact of the social cash transfer and the agricultural intervention. In this kind of study, in which we look at the synergies between programs, we also do cost-benefit analysis to see whether the benefits that we observe, especially in the productive activities, when the programs are conducted jointly, are overcome or are greater than the cost of implementing these. So in this kind of study, the cost-benefit analysis is always included. For the impact evaluation of single program, we don't do always. We probably should have done, but it's not always part of our study. But it is part of our study, especially when we do the analysis of the synergies. Thank you.
Just to complement, we basically follow the same approach, and we include in our questionnaire, in the RIMA questionnaire, a module on others transfer received and aid received by the household, and we try to control as much as possible this in the analysis. And I think that the only way for doing this is to strongly collaborate with the country offices and with colleagues in the field, because they have the knowledge of the area and the other projects ongoing there.
Okay, so thank you very much for all these comments and for your reply. It's 3:20. Before I propose to stop for 5 minutes for a coffee, I would like to make a very short summary of this session. And I think that this session showed clearly that among international organizations, starting from IFPRI, then continuing with FAO, and then also I'm a little bit biased because, of course, Alessandra is part of RIA, there is an increasing use of sound and rigorous analysis that try to assess, evaluate, and study the impact of what the international development community is trying to do in developing countries. And this is important. The main question mark, which will be part also of my closing remark later, is how does sound and theoretical models that are implemented in various agencies can be closer not only to the operations, to the operation unit of an agency, but also in the field, so how they are communicated. And this is, I think, the challenge of the next 10, 15 years, or maybe more, because in the last 10, 15 years, the production of data, the use of tools and methods to evaluate has increased tremendously. Also, the number of evaluation, the type and the models that are used are wide. And it seems that there are 2 islands. And the problem is how to make the communication between those 2 islands. It cannot be only the goal of a communication unit. It should be something a little bit stronger. So I don't want to anticipate the closing remark. I don't want to keep time from the coffee break. And also, I really ask you to come back here. I will announce the beginning of the next session in 5 minutes, just to give the time to each speaker of the second session to present what they have to say, and then to open for the final question. Thank you.
Okay, whatever. So he starts talking about the challenges. Okay, let me show you on this slide. Come, I'll show you on this one. Let me show you. Don't look at the which end. You can look at it. It's a big deal. So I think we start with the challenge. Then we go to the and then we come back to it. And here it's the same PowerPoint. It's just that it's starts from slide number 4.
So this one, you stop and you continue.
I know the professional.
Actually, we should take a pause on impact evaluation, but now we'll come back to facade something on the impact evaluation.
Can you please come back in the room? We're going to start the second session.
I don't work here, but I want to get here. Okay. So, yeah, my friend invited me because it's a small place that
Can you please all, please,
longer, but
we're starting the second session. Can I ask the speaker of the second session to approach and to sit here in the room? Can I ask the speaker?
We corrected the problem.
David Zilberman, can you come here? We're waiting for you. Okay, so now we're starting the second session of this joint seminar. So let me briefly introduce the speaker. Carlo Azzarri is Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI, and prior to joining IFPRI, Carlo was a team member of the Living Standard Measurement Study Research Group of the World Bank. Carlo received his PhD from the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and he has consulted widely with the World Bank, FAO, and other international organizations. Natalia Winder-Rossi, Senior Social Protection Specialist with the Policy and Programmatic Experience in Latin America and Eastern and Southern Africa. Prior to join FAO, she was Senior Program Specialist at UNICEF. And Natalia has also worked for the Inter-American Development Bank in the Social Protection Design, Indigenous People Development and Education Program. Michael Carbon has worked in evaluations since 2005 in the IFAD and UNEP. He led a great variety of ex-post evaluation in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, including evaluation of disaster and conflict, climate change, and chemicals. He obtained a master in bioengineering at KU Leuven and also a diploma in tropical agronomy from the Centre National d'Études Agronomiques des Régions Chaudes. Ansip Kaira is the evaluation officer of IOE. He has led impact evaluations in Georgia, Kenya, and project evaluation in Guyana and Sri Lanka. Before joining IFAD, Ansip has worked with FAO in the area of policy research and analysis. Mr. Kaira has a Master in Agricultural Economics from the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies and an MBA from the University of Bombay. Professor David Zilberman is an economist and professor and Robinson Chair in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at the University of California, Berkeley. David has received last week the Wolf Prize for Food, Wolf Prize for Agriculture, which is basically the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Agriculture. And the reason why he was awarded this very important prize was for developing economic model that address fundamental issues in agriculture, economics, and policy making. David was born in Jerusalem. He has built his career around economics of agriculture, environment, technology, and the risk they involve. David is also, together with Professor Scandizzo, one of the leaders of this ICABR, which is the International Consortium on Applied Bioeconomy Research that has led issues related to agriculture and rural development in the last 20 years, and whose annual conference is starting tomorrow in Ravello. So, contrary to the initial organization of the session, we will have a first presentation by Hans Diep, who will set the stage for all the session, presenting the main slides that will be the leitmotif of all the other presentations, namely the challenges of impact evaluation of agriculture and food security program. Then Carlo will focus on the innovation by IFPRI on risk-adjusted projection and practical impact evaluation. Natalia will focus by innovation led by FAO on impact evaluation and social protection program. And finally, Michael Carbone and Hans Diep will also look at the impact evaluation conducted by the Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this second session. So this second session is basically about challenges and innovations. The idea was to present challenges separately. But then when we sat together, we realized that there are a set of challenges, common set of challenges that all of us face. And so we decided to combine and present it as a joint presentation, the challenges. Just to mention that the challenges run into 3 slides, but I'm sure you have more to add. And this is just to demonstrate the scale of challenges that we confront when we are doing impact evaluation. So to make it a little more meaningful, okay, I can use both. To make it more meaningful, we have categorized the challenges into three heads. So there are certain challenges that are specific to development interventions and also humanitarian programs. And this is the most daunting challenge, of course, we face is that there is usually there is no assignment of random assignment of treatment. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have to start with. And of course, there is limited money, resources are always limited when we are doing impact evaluation, so that also can affect the rigor that we can possibly introduce. And of course, the ever-changing context, whether it's fragile situations, whether it's conflicts breaking out, it's always a challenge to evaluate projects at the end when context is so dynamic. And of course, we all know that more and more the projects are integrated, which means there are multiple treatment arms or multiple interventions that we have to confront. And of course, even the most solid evidence doesn't always convince decision makers. Decision makers always feel they have what they believe is their own knowledge, which might run contrary to even the most robust methods. Some of the challenges related to agriculture, food security, and nutrition programs are listed here. The first challenge listed here is with regards to indicators. It's sometimes and often it's difficult to measure indicators related to resilience. We saw a PowerPoint presentation earlier, but we also know in terms of food security relationships, it's difficult to measure. And but the capacity of local population also, when we rely a lot on participatory methods, but there is a certain limit to that based on the capacity of local people. And of course, given the problems associated with agriculture, especially the last two ones, the spatial diversity, agroclimatic conditions, and also the timing of the data collection is so crucial. Many times we may have a fixed time when we have to start, but that may not coincide with either the production period or with the food security, with the situation there. So that's another thing we are faced with. And finally, there are certain challenges which are specific to the location of projects, problems of remote areas which are difficult to access, local capacity. Many times you go in countries and we rely on local expertise which may not be up to the standard. So that's a challenge we have to face all the time. And other things include certain taboos and obstacles, especially when we go on data collection, where, you know, in some instances the female member may not be allowed to participate in the survey. And then there are interventions, other, you know, the whole contamination issue. So some of the project areas are replete with so many donors working together. And then finally, of course, we know issues related to baseline, which we often face: missing baselines not completed on time, and the general lack of M&E data. So these were some of the challenges that we as a group wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Hansdeep. And now the floor is to Carlo Azzarri.
Yeah, thanks.
Carlo, I'll show you the signature of 1 minute left.
I guess I have too many things in my hands. So I have a presentation. I don't know if it's coming up soon. Is it coming up? No, I can do it. Oh, that's fine. Actually, yeah, why don't we do that? So it's easier. Okay, so we were asked to talk about challenges and innovation impact evaluation, bringing the perspective of IFPRI. And of course, we won't represent the whole institute, also because Alan already presented some of the evaluation that MTID, so another division at IFPRI, did. So we are just talking about innovation impact evaluation, so not challenges anymore. But the innovation will try, of course, to overcome the challenges that Hans mentioned before. So some of the innovation, the way I see it now, we have two main innovations. The first is the use of geospatial impact evaluation. And I will devote most of my presentation on this because it's really a new area, given the advancement in of course, computing power, but also availability of satellites and also frequency of data from remote sensing. But also, we shouldn't forget about use of administrative data. Now is very early stage in developing worlds because they've been used mostly in developed countries as of now. But there is a suite of it's the suite of data that is potentially available in 20 years' time. Of course, in developing countries, of course, not in all developing countries, but depending on the country and the context, is immense in terms of research possibilities and also looking at impact evaluation. So there is I just have an example of the Warfare program in Mauritius that is currently underway, where they merged a lot of administrative data, so from unemployment benefit received from the Ministry of Labor, they merged with the entire Social Security number before and after participation to this program from the Ministry of Social Security. Then they use additional information from the database of public employment information and also National Health Service. So they use and everything they matched based on one ID number that they put in each and every survey. So that's very powerful. I think in 20 years' time. So, but let's talk more about geospatial impact assessment. Impact evaluation that is today's situation we are in. So we will provide 4 examples. So the first example is from our division, from EPTD, Environment and Production Technology Division, so Environmental and Natural Resource Management in Malawi. And Ephraim, my colleague who is here, will come after me. And then the second example will be on farm water management program brought by Aid Data. And the Aid Data is a research group that is based at William and Mary College that is helping us in using geospatial impact evaluation in actual work. And also we will actually be submitted unsuccessfully. Unfortunately, I submitted a proposal to IFAD, but so we didn't get it. Okay, so we can skip that. So the third example will be from PHND, so Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division. Dan, my colleague, is sitting in DC, couldn't join because of other meetings, but will provide a perspective also from nutrition side. And then finally, the program of rural microfinance in Mali that we are currently working on with IFAD RIA. So let me go a little bit in detail, but not that much for reason of time, of course, on the geospatial impact assessment. So the basic idea is rather than using randomized control trial to identify counterfactual, geospatial impact assessment still seeks to achieve a similar results through one of the 3 methods. The 2 methods you can really relate to the traditional impact evaluation, right? So the strategic subsample of observational data to identify theory and control. And then you usually do using, if you're not if you don't have a luxury to have a randomized control trial, you usually do propensity score matching. The second is comparing pre and post intervention change through difference in difference or fixed effects. And these two think about from a spatial perspective. So these two components bring spatial heterogeneity, right? And since there is a spatial heterogeneity, we need to account for it. The third is really the nutshell of what we are trying to do with geospatial impact tests, and so it's exploiting the discontinuity around the geographical cutoff. This means that the usual regression discontinuity design can be applied also here by putting a geographical boundary. So if you wish, it's a regression, is a geographical discontinuity design, right? So, so here is a quick example. So of course, this is Amazonas in Brazil, as you can easily remember, as you can easily show. So this is geocoded KfW, that is a German investment bank, development bank. This is an intervention site. And we would like to match the information with the georeference outcome data. In this case, it's deforestation. So doing that, of course, we are still not sure about the attribution mechanism that Professor Candizo mentioned before. But it's a good approximation if we insert all this information in the regression, multivariate regression model, controlling for grid cell level pre-treatment characteristic and time variant characteristics, as we do here, for example. This is a case of Tanzania, southeastern tip of Tanzania. These are deforestation, so percentage of forest loss between 2001 and 2005. So this is before the intervention, let's say. So and then the Chinese intervention project on infrastructure kicked in, and this is what happened after between 2005 and 2014. See, now there's a percentage of forest loss 2001 to 2014. And these are the intervention side of the Chinese infrastructure project. Well, you might think, you might let to think, well, oh, okay, so the Chinese destroyed the forest, right? But it's not true, actually. So if you don't know that, if you don't know the pre-treatment for deforestation loss that was earlier on, before the start of the project, and then that the evaluator actually took into account, you wouldn't like to think about that the Chinese destroyed the forest in Tanzania, right? But with the time varying spatial variables such as elevation, rainfall, well, elevation is not time varying, precipitation and temperature, etc., and DVI, we are able to net out the effect of the deforestation loss so the effect of the Chinese infrastructure on the deforestation loss. So last on geospatial impact. So the application can be either retrospective, so for completed project, or also prospective for active and future project, but cannot be, of course, for all kind of project. Imagine a nutrition project. Nowadays, it's very difficult to monitor and evaluate nutrition over time that is attributable to a specific project. Well, in the future, I think it is. We just actually lost another unsuccessful proposal to Google about this, but we'll talk about this later. So the constraint is that data availability, both on intended outcomes and on spatial distribution intervention, because not always you have the spatial distribution of information ready at the spatial level of resolution needed for that particular project. And the feasibility is only for spatial differentiated intervention, as I said before. So nutrition is not really feasible right now, will be feasible in the future. For example, if you think about support to the central government, so usually this kind of immaterial benefit, such as governance, etc., are not really available. But if you think about more practical, let's say, newly protected areas, primary health clinics, agricultural sanctuary, these are very available from geospatial impact evaluation perspective. Sorry that I'm talking too fast because I have 80 slides. So this is a project actually that Ephraim was involved in. So.
Now, I want to repeat some of the things you said regarding the problems that we're facing. The first thing is, why are we doing this study? It is 84% of power in Malawi comes from hydropower. Now, the generation is going down because of soil erosion and all that. So they called us and I said, okay, can you do an impact assessment of our intervention? So they were doing an intervention which was covering only 1% of the entire watershed. They were planting trees. Now, if you do an analysis of the entire watershed, that even though you have a very big impact in that 1% area, is not going to have any impact on the hydropower generation, which is determined by the entire watershed. So that's the first problem. The coverage is very small. Secondly, it was only 3 years. Now, one tree grows for 6 years. So in those 3 years, nothing's going to have any impact. And the other thing is the same thing, the non-randomization, and then you have all this problem of the others. So what do? So this is the solution that we had was, this is the Rishira River Valley in Malawi, and it's big, and this is the model that we developed of doing the soil and water conservation tool that we use, the SWAT model. Next. So what we did was to use modeling. This is a SWAT model. That one will do an assessment that we thought that, okay, if that 1% is implemented following the policy that Malawi has committed itself of restoration of degraded land, what impact will that have? So this is a simulation model that we used, which is the SWAT model, and we used the satellite data that Carlo was talking about, and we did the ground truthing, and also the data that we are using had very good resolution, but they were not classified. We did not do that, and then we did the classification, and then after that, next slide, please. And these are the results that we got. We got the results that we wanted to have, and in short, we were able to determine the impact of the model, not the intervention, but the policy implementation. If it was implemented, and it was implemented in that scale, then we were able to identify the impact. So that's it.
Thanks, Ephraim. Very, very good. Here we can actually go fast here. Maybe I should take control so we can go faster. Not because you are not fast enough, because this way. So this is actually the canal improvements through an on-farm water management project evaluation in Afghanistan. This is actually from William and Mary College, the 8 data research teams that I mentioned you about. So to merge again, here we are merging geospatial data. So they're merging existing data on the location and timing of canal improvements with satellite data on basically on the NDVI. And I won't actually bother you with the details, but the essence is obtaining the PDF map from project implementers, then the obtain georeference satellite base layer from the satellite. So that can be either public access or you need to pay a little fee depending on the resolution of the spatial data. And then you match both of them in the same shapefile. So you link PDF to satellite layer using, of course, GPS of the locations of the canal improvements. And then once you do that, use GIS software. I think in this case they use ArcGIS to trace canal lines and catchment area from the map from the implementers and from the satellite data to base layer to produce a georeference canal data. And you have also the timeline. So you don't have only spatial data, but you have the timeline of canal improvement in the project. So, and then you also have plot reference canal data in preparation to geospatial analysis. But then geospatial analysis, of course, will come later. And this is basically the end result. So this is a canal improvement, and this is a 30 by 30 grid cell resolution, and then the catchment area around this canal. And then you can run the regression at the grid cell level to see what are the variables that are correlated, and of course, before and after, with or without the canal improvement, because you have spatial data again. Bundle intervention for nutrition, this is something that Poverty Health Nutrition is very involved in IFPRI. So I will skip the detail about the underlying assumption, but the challenge is which combination of intervention have the most impact, be most effective. And this is actually something very useful for IFAD as well, because you have a portfolio of projects, but then you need to decide which are the interventions with the priorities and which are the combination that gives the highest bang for the buck. So Alive and Thrive, WASH, Benefits, and Shine, they're all projects that are not benefiting. We know why. Yes, we know why, because they're not bundled. So they're just one single project intervention that are not. So, for example, Alive and Thrive give women more information and improve knowledge, but it did not reduce child stunting. So what does it mean? Well, we need more experiments of bundle interventions, because it's only with the bundle intervention, so for example, in this case, behavioral change communication and cash, that we can bring some impact. So this is another project from PHND in Uganda, so biofortified crops. I will skip you the details about this. There are 4 treatment arms with low saturation, high saturation, opinion leaders, and normal, let's say, traditional farmer group targeting. And then the highest, let's say, impact was high saturation. So let me close here with a slide that I think is dear to our hearts, because we are working right now with RIA, with IFAD RIA in Mali. And here what we did is to draw, so again, we do a constraint randomization to identify counterfactual. So we know where the treated communes are, but we don't know which valid counterfactual we want to draw. to compare to the treatment? Well, what we do is we draw boundaries around the treatment to avoid contamination, and then we do a randomization within a common support. So we run a propensity score matching using, again, special data that I'm not showing here, using the usual suspect, NDVI and elevation and rainfall, etc., to be able to have a value counterfactual, right, in a common support, but not matching one-to-one, because otherwise we would be pruning the data set in a way. So lessons learned, I'm done. So let's go beyond traditional impact measure from impact assessment. As Alessandra was saying before, calculating both breadth, that is the number of poor people who will benefit in 10 years, depth, that is the benefit per person, and probability of success. So what is the chances, the likelihood that this project will be successful in 10 years' time, even more, even longer? So we don't need to evaluate everything, especially at the IFAD level, corporate level. Possible here we say possible impact evaluation criteria, large budget share, because it's more likely that impacted, we have a higher breadth, affects many people. Again, at least where there is at least little existing evidence of impact for target population, because we all know about Oportunidades, Bolsa Familia, etc., but we don't know about other projects that maybe have brought a good change. So important to learn, that this goes back to Professor Scandizzo's observation before, not only whether something works or not, but important is why it works. So why prayers work? Not because God, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe God hears us, but because there is a change in behavior, right, that people make. So complement quantitative with qualitative is very important. Apply geospatial, of course, and not only use learning from intervention that worked, but also for intervention that didn't work, as was the case of Alive and Thrive and other. Thanks, sorry.
Thank you very much, Carlo. And now we move to the next presentation. Natalia Winder-Rossi from the Social Protection Team of FAO. I will kindly ask you to try to be within the 12 minutes.
I will, yes.
And so this will allow to give time to our IOE colleagues and then Q&A.
So while the presentation is loading, I'm Natalia Winder. I lead the social protection team in FAO, and I think I'm the only non-economist of the panelists thus far. So I don't know if that's good or bad. We were asked to reflect a little bit about the experience of the Transport Project that Noemi presented in the morning, and the linkages between the generation of that evidence towards influencing policy making. No. So just to start, the motivation around the Transfer Project was not necessarily research, but it was a policy question. Can social programs have also economic and productive impacts? Can the different design of programs in Africa, very different to the traditional programs in Latin America, can they also have similar impacts in terms of access to education, health, but also economic potential? This program was focused on sub-Saharan Africa, as Noemi said, because there was a question around the very different types of programs and the potential impacts around it. We basically focus on assessing government programs, so national government programs that were already within the national poverty reduction strategies, not pilots or NGO-led programs, but national programs. And there was a very strong linkage between how that evidence was going to influence different policy decisions in terms of design, in terms of implementation, but most importantly for our perspective, in terms of scale-up. It was not a research done that, FAO sitting in Rome, UNICEF sitting in New York, but really having a very strong relationship with the government partners and local researchers. So it was a maybe multi-stakeholder initiative really to integrate ownership in terms of policy questions and research questions. As Noemi said in the previous session, we had a very strict mix methods. Again, to understand the impacts, but also understand why those impacts, and in some cases also simulate some of the potential impacts if some changes were introduced. It was focusing on impacts on the program participants, as well as the potential multiplier effects beyond the program participants. And I don't use beneficiaries on purpose. And it included social impacts, the traditional things that you will expect a social protection program to have, so education, health, nutrition, but also the other questions around economic potential, rural women's economic empowerment, youth employment, and others. I'm not going to pretend that you read this, but that just to give you an example, to give you an idea that we did have a theory of change, if you want, on how do we want to see this project influencing a change in perception around policymakers, around program participants, and then eventually and progressively make a change in terms of policy decisions. So this was not an impact evaluation program. There was a research agenda to be able to make change along different lines. No, and I think the results of the impact evaluation definitely influence programs at two levels. The design of the programs, making programs much more effective and efficient. Issues, for example, in terms of targeting, how to better reach those the program wanted to reach. Transfer size, what is the best size of transfers in order to see the types of impacts that we wanted to see. The role of complementary interventions. If we want to have impacts around food and nutrition security, cash is important, but we cannot expect a cash transfer to address all the multi-sectoral determinants on nutrition. No? How do we have a much more integrated package around that? Of course, we're not claiming that because of this evidence, all the changes in social protection in Africa happened, but it definitely had a contribution in terms of giving policymakers more rigid information to make change happen. I think it shifted a little bit the narrative in social protection being a cost vis-a-vis being an intervention that was generating impacts across different areas. Not only human capital, but also enhancing the economic and productive capacity of the poorest. It really addressed, or helped to address, because there's still some questions out there, around the myths that social protection creates dependency, that creates labor disintensive, that the poor are lazy and they're poor because they are lazy, and really seeing and showing real numbers in terms of productive impacts, and how consumption and productive decisions are very interrelated, and the need to have other means such as social protection to be able to enable choice. No? I think it was also important in terms of the policy discussion to expand the discussion on social protection beyond labor and social development ministries, and bringing the interest and the expertise of the ag ministries, trade ministries, and most importantly, the ministries of finance. We cannot use human rights arguments, unfortunately, to convince the Ministry of Finance that they have to invest in social protection. No? So we had to try to also change the discourse and the way that we were presenting the need to scale up these programs. Again, not as a cost, but as an investment. And I think it also, because this was around a very solid and rigorous impact evaluation program, it enhanced the credibility of the impact of these programs. And it was surrounded by really rigorous evidence, but also recognized organizations at national level, so the main universities, University of Malawi, of Ghana, of Zambia, researchers, recognized researchers in different international organizations, the University of North Carolina and others, and trying to really have a very multi-sectoral approach around rigor. Some of the success factors, without repeating myself, I talked about the embeddedness of the national processes, the broad-based research agenda, but I think a very key thing about timing. Very, very seldom governments are willing to wait for 2 years or 3 years evaluation, so we produced different types of analytical pieces that we could feed throughout the 3 or 4 years of impact evaluation to start developing that narrative. You know, rapid assessments work, simulation work, process types evaluations that could progressively build a much more stronger argument around the importance to scale up social protection programs. The way that we messages and we packaged these results are long in investment around knowledge management. Sometimes economists cannot talk to regular people, so we had to really change those messages to really make sure that policymakers were understanding, but also those program participants that were engaging in these programs understood the potential impacts of being part of a social protection program. We created a community of practice, so this is not, you know, one organization putting forth results, but really motivating a discussion on the best methods, but also on the best research questions that policymakers wanted to discuss at national level. And of course, having very strong champions at government and national level that were able to put this agenda forward. So it's not just the evidence by itself that makes change, but also bringing the policymakers owning this whole agenda. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for being within the 12 minutes, and thank you for your presentation. We see that the challenges are tremendous from all the institutions to be able not only to produce impact, but also to disseminate impact. And now the floor is to Michael Carbon and Hans-Diep Keyraff for the IOE perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Oscar has touched upon it a little bit in in a previous explanation, in IOE, in the Independent Evaluation Office of IFAD, we don't conduct many impact evaluations, only one a year, but they have the particularity of covering all evaluation criteria, not only impact, and also they try to be innovative. Our evaluations use mixed method approaches, and obviously we always have a solid, a rigorous quantitative survey, but we try to complement this with innovative, qualitative methods or other methods that will help us to explain what is actually happening behind the numbers. And Hans-Diep and I will just mention two small innovations that we have been introducing in our impact evaluations. So, say you would like to assess impact of a project on women participation in household decision making, or on the inclusiveness of farmer organizations, or say you want to assess the effects on negotiating power of farmers versus traders in a developing country. Now, these are very complex changes. And if you only try to imagine a theory of change behind that, all the factors that come into play that will affect these women's participation or these farmers' negotiating powers and so on, it's very complex, and most relationships are not linear. So a quantitative survey with direct questioning is not going to give us much reliable information. As you know, people communicate a lot through stories. Yeah, just remember your lunch. If you had lunch with somebody else, you probably half of the time you spend it actually telling stories. What did you do last weekend? How are the kids? And you illustrate a lot of what you are saying with anecdotes, with little stories, and that's a very good way of remembering what is happening in your life. Most things you relate to each other through stories. It's also a very good way of communicating, of course, by examples and so on. And we discovered that there is a whole field of storytelling that is being used in management, and that also now is being used more and more in research to try to understand and to make sense of reality, as an alternative to asking direct questions to people. And the method we are developing in IOE is called participatory narrative surveys. Okay, they are participatory because they involve stakeholders in telling the stories, of course, and in analyzing and interpreting their own stories, and that way to make sense to their own realities. It's story-based, which we found to be more effective than direct questioning, especially on qualitative, social, more sensitive subjects. But it's still a survey, so you still ask many people, hundreds, to tell you stories and to help you analyze these stories. So there is still a lot of power in the numbers. Even if they are not statistically valid, they can still be very convincing in showing you trends and patterns that you can further investigate. Now, in a participatory narrative survey, you typically start off with trying to reconstruct a theory of change. But as I already said, these are usually in the beginning very simplistic, because we can't know exactly what is going on in a particular context in a given country. We don't always understand, we are not always specialists in a particular subject. But based on this theory of change, we develop a questionnaire which starts off by asking people to tell us a story. For example, we asked women in Niger, over the last 5 years, can you recall a decision that was made within your household that that really had an important effect on your household? What happened? Who took part in that decision? And then we let women tell us about this decision. They could choose anything. They could talk about anything they wanted. But by getting many stories, we actually got a very good understanding of social dynamics and how women were taking part in decision making, and what were the drivers, what was really helping them with that. during that the storytelling phase, the people don't only tell you a story, but they also respond to a small number of multiple choice questions where they help you already to do an interpretation of the story. For example, there are questions that you ask about the story itself, which sentiments, which feelings they provoked with people. What are the main subjects? For example, with the woman, what is the subject on which the decision was made? If we told this story to your husband, how would he feel about it, and so on. So there are questions that we ask that make the storyteller herself or himself interpret it, and it's not the researcher who does that interpretation. Then there is a phase where we bring all these stories and that interpretation, all these data answers to these questions back to the office, and we run it through some software that help us to identify patterns and trends within the stories. And we have used two different softwares. One is called SenseMaker, which many people here probably have heard about. It's quite well advertised. But now in Niger we use Narafirma, which is a freeware, which is a free software that is quite powerful as well, and it's much cheaper to use and in a way much more practical. Then after this analysis, we go back to the stakeholders, to the women or to the farmers that we asked to tell us stories, and we read them back a number of stories in group discussions. We read back to them a number of stories they told, that we found to be quite significant for the trends that we had identified during the catalysis phase. And based on the retelling of the stories, we ask people to comment, and we ask them to tell us, okay, is this also what happens in your village? Can you explain what is really happening here? What are the decisions being made, and so on? Then based on these group discussions, we enrich a lot the analysis part, and it's a very participatory way of doing it. We don't expect that at the end of the catalysis we have found the answers, but the answers are coming really from the stakeholders themselves during the sense-making phase in group discussions. And then based on that, we prepare the report, and very importantly, we refine the theory of change, which is then based much more on what is happening within that particular context.
Thank you, Michael. And then, Hans-Diep, really, I will kindly ask you to be within the 5 minutes, and we give the floor to David for the final discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be quick, because what I'm presenting is geospatial, which was already presented by Carlo, and ironically, I was even shifting his slides. Fine, that's okay. So anyway, well, it is a very similar method that we had used. Basically, the outcome of interest was looking at change in land cover thanks to the rehabilitation of a canal, and this was done in Georgia. So there were at least three problems that we were hoping to overcome. One was, and these problems we have discussed earlier, one was related to the fact that in hard to reach areas, as you know, Georgia is a bit mountainous, and you cannot always reach there. So we thought of using remote sensing for that. The second reason was for triangulation. So it was meant to triangulate data, the results of the household survey that we were conducting in the same area. And the third reason was we thought that we believed that having a more objective, if you may, method would also help in convincing the policymakers better. So those were the reasons for using this. And we used it both for sampling and for analysis. So we used this in constructing, in selecting the control areas, similar to what Carlo mentioned, looking at distance, things like distance to the market, looking at a lot of other things which geospatial analysis would help us in selecting. And then we also used it for analysis, which I just mentioned. It was used to triangulate the results that we got from the household survey. So yeah, we also use the normalized difference vegetation index, which gives you a sense of how land cover has changed. Well, we also used the before after, the difference in difference method called the Bacci, and it has nothing to do with the Italian equivalent. But what it meant was it's the before after control intervention. Yeah, so basically we looked at that. We had to use MODIS, which is not so, let's say, it is not so accurate. It doesn't give you that granular information, simply because we really wanted to go back in time. And 2004, we wanted to, because we were using a kind of a difference in difference, we wanted to go even before the baseline and just see how, if we can find any similarities or the parallel trend analysis. So we had to use MODIS. But if it were a more recent project, or analysis, we would have used Landsat and others that are more, now give even more accurate picture. And of course, the results were, we found that there was a minor increase in the land cover. And for us, it also coincided with the results that we had on the ground, where beneficiaries had mentioned that, there was a very slight increase in the land cover. They did not really expand a lot, even though water had reached their doorsteps or farm steps, as in this case. And then the important point for us also, besides having tested this innovative method, was that it showed us the power of partnerships. So we collaborated with colleagues in-house in the Environment and Climate Division, and so we use internal in-house expertise, and we did not have to spend because it was a collaboration, so it was really cost-effective for us to having done that, and therefore we were able to use it to great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans-Diep. And now, David, your turn to make a final discussion on those presentations or in this afternoon.
I don't know if it's final or not. I'd like to make some comments about impact assessment and the challenges it faces. I think we have to recognize that all this impact assessment is not something natural that economists will do. It basically came out of some egomaniac donors that want to know their impact. That's the truth, I can say it. And they basically dictated a lot of the methodologies and the approach. Why you call them rigorous? Other things that we do in economics are not rigorous. That's basically it's marketing in action. So basically we want this guy to feel good so they will give us money. And think about it, IFAD basically is a group of, we live, impact live of charity, and of clarity of people that are very rich and egomaniac, so they want to show that they have the impact. Now, we have to say it in order to understand where we are. So on one hand, we have on one hand, to really to be able to be effective, and on the other hand, to give them the numbers so they will be happy and continue to give the money. Very cynical, but that's what your boss thinks. And believe me, I did many impact assessments in my life, and I know when they were effective. But then you have to ask yourself, what really are the issues that matter? How you can combine some of this ability to identify who contribute what to identifying how you have a better program? Because the big challenge is not to assess who did what, because this is really, it doesn't really matter. The basic challenge is to get the maximum out of resources and contribute to development. So it's a really trick, how you contribute to development versus how you make Bill Gates feel that he changed the world. He gives you $30 billion, he deserves it. So I think in order to do it, you really have to think about, develop a theory of change before you start with all these little theories of change. And try to understand what are some of the basic principles. See, principle number one that to me is important, that the data collection should be part of the project. Today, the biggest revolution that we have is the computer revolution. Every person has now a cell phone or a bicycle. That's what I learned. That's my introduction. So you try to, every time that you have a new project, you try that the data collection will be within this project. Number two, I was very happy that we have non-economists here that really think about things in a different perspective, to try to speak with people who are not economists to see what they are thinking. Number three is to recognize the importance of narrative. Now, why narrative is important? Suppose you get a ticket, you had a traffic violation and someone run regression. You don't give a damn. You really would like to look at the story, at the narrative, and see what happened, because a lot of time you really need to look at the narrative and try to integrate the narrative with the economics. So to me, if you can develop think about system that integrate data, look at the complete picture, look at the story, at the overall picture, look at the narrative and combine it with the economic, you have something big. Now, you cannot do it in one day, you need to, but to me that should be the objective. The objective not to develop some accounting things that satisfy a donor without really looking at other things. Now, the two things that are very important. Donors always want to know how many people you saved. Now, the reality that most projects may help a few number of people. Like, for example, when I was a kid, there was a lot of projects to introduce mathematics to kids in my school, advanced mathematics. I benefited from it. 90% of the kids didn't benefit from it. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a bad project because of the spillover in society, but you have to recognize that there is heterogeneity and there are different levels of benefit. The other thing that you have to recognize is that a lot of time, again, people are not economists, there are market side effects, and a lot of time you have to change the project on the spot. How did the project change on the spot, and what were the lessons? If you ask me what the lessons of the Gates Foundation is, that they never complete anything because they make a mistake and they change it on the spot. So how you modify the project on the spot, and what is the lesson next time? So to me, I really think that you're doing a very important job, but the key element is not only to do what the donor wants, but to do what is appropriate from a scientific perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I think that your intervention can be called the beauty of being the academia, where you can say you are an external, very external. No, you're right, in the sense. Okay, let me make a final. Let me make a couple of comments on your point, the point you raised. It's true that a collection should be part of the project cost. And it's, in fact, you may not be aware, but what many international organizations, including IFAD, are doing. The problem is the quality of what you are collecting. Now everything became easy because you have a cell phone, because you have an iPad, so you just create a format, a questionnaire with whatever online system, and you collect data. So the challenge is to collect the data you need to show what you want to show. And what you want to show is that at least that you were able to produce something. But this something has to, unfortunately, needs to have a number. It has to be equal to a number, to a percentage of change, or to a monetary proxy for welfare, for well-being, or whatever you want. So you need to identify proxy indicators to fill that. Now, what is the problem that I see in these two sessions is that it's true what I thought at the beginning, that in the last 10 years, at least since 2008, with this high food price crisis, the number of data which have been produced in agriculture have increased tremendously. And this has been the result of a donor effort to increase the production and that have financing the production of new data for agriculture. And then there is a small group of people, most probably the group of people which is here, and maybe those who are connected, that are very happy because they're using those data for making something they feel or they hope will make a change for the community. And the problem is that those data, those results of analysis should be also useful for those who will implement the projects and who will have to design the projects. So the challenge is to learn from each other. And I don't see any other format of learning from each other than from working with each other. Because there is no way people who are not involved on a daily basis on GPS data, georeferential data, on more, qualitative survey, less participatory survey, so to know exactly what are the intricacies of the work they're doing. David, what we did, in fact, with RIA, sorry, but I have also to highlight what are the achievement of the division that I coordinate, and most of the people are here. With those ex post impact assessment, by collecting information not only on the beneficiaries but also on the best control group we were able to build, we have tried to draw some lessons learned. And one of the lessons learned was that a project who is able to change, to change its theory of change while it is implementing, a project who is able to meet the new challenge that the implementation like the constraints of this implementation, is the project who has the highest probability of having a success, of having a higher impact. But this has to be done by means of, call it rigorous, call it an analysis, which have to complement maybe more subjective approach that have been implemented in the past. So this is what we are trying, this is also my closing remark in terms of representative of RIA, the Research and Impact Assessment Division, so to be this knowledge broker between the producer of analytical work and the user of analytical work. And if you think about it, for IFAD is, I wouldn't say easier, but at least we have a specific mandate and we're smaller. So we're able to work more and to learn more from each other. I'm thinking of larger organizations like IFPRI, also, which has many regional centers, or FAO. This is more difficult just for the number of people who work in the organization or for the location of the different centers. So we really want to take advantage of this strong asset that we have to hope and to build for the better and to also engage with the academia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Now I would like to give the floor to the audience for Q&A after these interesting presentations and the provocative thoughts of David. Please, the floor is open. Yes.
Okay, I have a question for the panelists and including David and his provocative comments. So what I heard two things, right? So David said, okay, we are all preoccupied with little theories of change, and as part of the impact assessment, we validate the project theory of change. But you're talking about macro theories of change, and if I'm hearing you well, you're asking us to address what Sara just said, maybe a coordination failure, right? The fact that we should work and have a program of impact assessment that evaluate a global maybe an economic theory about some interventions leading to outcome and impacts. Unfortunately, as you know, coordination comes with a cost, and it's another job in itself, and it's subject to a budget constraint. So our major problem is budget constraints on many sides, both the resources to implement impact assessment, the resources to coordinate. How can we, and then there is the other problem that it is true that these programs are highly heterogeneous. So disentangling ex post something that is multifaceted, changed over time, as Ansip said, multiple components, this dynamic implementation we don't know, we have to reconstruct, and sometimes the people left and the span of a project is really challenging. So in the end, you arrive with a black box, and basically something that you have to understand what, basically from narratives, which we have narratives that are real, but probably we didn't emphasize that much, that we actually engage with the stakeholders to understand what happened. So how to disentangle this heterogeneity? How to address these coordination failures? And basically they're very difficult questions, and how to address a fundamental budget constraint.
Naomi?
Yeah. I have two questions for Michael. Regarding the participatory narrative surveys. First of all, I did not understand what is the main difference between this approach to traditional qualitative impact assessment. And then the second question is, how do you select the participants? This is a very basic question, but just I understood that it's very inclusive, so I wonder how can you select the participant to this group?
Thank you. And third question over there.
My question also goes to Michael. I ride on a metro with my wife, and every evening we come and tell stories about what we saw. The stories are very different. The one that I say and the one that she says, very, very different. And secondly, if you have young people, youth, and then the old people, and then they're in the same event, the stories they are going to tell are very different. So my question is, how do you address those different ways and methods and ways perception that people have?
One more, and please, we're here.
Yeah, well, I'd like to ask my question to Natalia in particular, because she's not an economist and because she talked about a social protection program, which we have an equivalent in Italy right now. We are trying to put together an impact evaluation program. Now, the basic question comes out, I mean, I agree with everything she said, and you have all the ingredients of a good evaluation impact. The problem is that if you have all those ingredients, you have a good communication program as well, not only evaluation, but also you have a tendency for this program to drift into an advocacy problem, or what gave it called the marketing problem. And question how would you avoid that with with the social, particularly with the controversial social protection program like the Italian one.
And the last one over there.
Thank you. I'm Elena Pichman from the Eastern Southern Africa division in IFAD. My question is on something that Hans Diep mentioned, but it's a common challenge, so I guess it's to all of you. And it's about the M&E systems of the projects and their weaknesses. So I'd like to know to what extent you make use of M&E data collected by the project. Is it only the baseline, or do you use other type of M&E data as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Due to the limited time, may we start the answers session, perhaps starting with Michael and going in this order. Right? Thanks.
I'm going to try to answer very quickly, but I have presentations about this for a whole day, if you want. Because we at some other occasion maybe we can talk in more detail. But I think the main two differences with, if you say very broadly, traditional qualitative methods, maybe you would like me more to compare with using, for example, life stories or case study approaches. In this. Because if you say qualitative methods, it's you have a very, very broad range, and I cannot compare this with every single one. But I think here the uniqueness is one that you collect many stories. So from a very wide diversity of your population within your population of interest, and that you ask them the same prompting question to get the story. Okay, so everybody gets the same question. And the fact that you have so many stories, and you ask people also to analyze the story themselves, you can also do some, let's say, correlation analysis on it, and see trends and patterns within the stories. And then you can try to analyze or try to understand already from your own point of view why these trends are there by reading the stories in a very selective way. In our surveys, we collect 400 or 500 stories, so you cannot read them from A to Z in one session, and then imagine what is appearing out of all these stories. You need some specific tools to do that, and the fact that you have many stories and you have all these, you use also software, and so you can do that. But the second particularity is that it's very participatory, because that first stage, when you have asked for the story and then a little questionnaire to analyze it, is already participatory, because the people that tell you the story analyze it. But then you go back to the same groups with stories from different villages, of course, and you have another round of discussion and analysis together with the stakeholders. So you have twice an opportunity to really get the participation and to have to involve the stakeholders in making sense out of the stories.
Thank you.
For the sampling, we used a random sampling, but it depends on the survey. With women, we used a random sampling within the random sample of households that we sampled for our quantitative survey. For the market study, we used a sampling based on distance to markets and so on. I mean, but it was all, there were some variables that gave us enough diversity within our sample. Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll quickly answer Elena's question. Because our mandate is to do ex-post evaluations, of course, we had like to use M&E data, especially things like for baseline, if you have a midline, endline, but the reality is a bit different from what we wish or what we want. So often, as you know, we end up with baselines that don't have a counterfactual, or they are done later, and they don't maybe have GPS coordinates. So if you want to have more of a panel data, we cannot have things. There are many things that we are forced, therefore, not to use, and then we end up reconstructing statistically a counterfactual when we come to do the survey. Having said that, of course, there's some data we use things like maybe outreach numbers that we feel which are important to inform achievement of objectives in our effectiveness section, efficiency section. We use data from the project. So yes, but we would have liked to use more, which we cannot. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that question. So two things. First, this was a research program to answer a policy question, no? And there was a lot of ifs. Does it work? Does it really have an impact? Can we really use it as something that we want to scale up and influence that? No, and that there were some answers showing that yeah, there was impact, and therefore we have an investment case. But they also showed a lot of the limitations of the program. So in that way, it's not that we from the beginning have the answer of yes, this is something that we want to push, so let's find the evidence, but really and very genuinely understanding the contribution, but also the limitations around what these types of programs can and cannot do. No, so I think there's a lot of realization that social protection is important, but of course not enough to be able to reach many of the impacts that we want to really make a difference in long-term poverty reduction. But it's definitely a component around it. But I think that one of the important discussions around that was a lot of the operational issues that we found and trying to show programs, for example, Ghana. Ghana, we didn't see at first a lot of the nice impacts that we were seeing in other countries because the operational and the implementation of the program was flawed because there was a lot of payments that were not done in time because there was a lot of political issues around it. So with a very impartial, let's say, information, we were able to influence the change in the operational implementation of that program. So it was also an instrument to show the limitations, the way to improve it, and being able to have that advocacy in a much more objective way, if you want. So I think it is a tool precisely to be able to understand the limitations as well as the contributions and be able to influence change so that policy is made based on that evidence. No?
Yeah, just quickly on three comments. Replying to three comments. The first is Alessandra on coordination failure, and also replying to David as well. So do we need even more coordination failure? I think we are coordinating a lot, actually, because we all know each other. FAO, WFP, actually, unfortunately, there is nobody from WFP here. But anyway, IFAD and RIA, etc., IFPRI, we are all the same people. We know what we do. I think if we all, let's say, co-author the same research or co-author the same paper, who will be the peer reviewer? So I think it's also good that we don't coordinate because everybody checks on the other one. So and then honestly, if we are kind of let's say independent. So yes, I'm hired by IFAD to provide this evaluation, but I have no problem at all to say, okay, this didn't work at all. So because I'm not worried about, yes, I have budget constraint, yes. We don't have a core budget, yes, David, but still being, let's say, in a close to academia, on practical implementation, I have no problem in saying, being independent, I have no problem in saying, no, this didn't work. And on budget constraint, yes, we all work on budget constraint. We all under budget constraint. I think we need to accept that. And I think it's actually very limiting for our activities. On M&E data, on practice, yes, although it depends on the method, it depends on the project, and depends on of course, of the budget of the project. Because I'm involved in projects where M&E data are intensively used. If you have funds to deploy, let's say, online platform where people upload data, etc., you can exploit in your evaluation. But I have projects where the capacity is so low locally that you can't actually have this, so we don't use them in the end. So we just use for reporting to the donor when it comes to reporting, and that's it. So yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
I'd like to make 2 points. First, with respect to how to operate. Generally speaking, if every time that I will have a project, I would do the people that gave me the money what they wanted, they would be happy and I would never have a paper or would never, and the world would be a worse place. So you have to decide to have an implicit overhead, you say let's say 20%, that you use to develop something that you think is right. You are not, they don't hire you, you are not some clerk for Gates, you are intellectual, have intellectual capacity and you want to improve the system. So you think, okay, I would really think how I make a system that will be better. And I take 20% of the budget. So instead of having 770 observations, you have 700 observations. The referee will know the difference, it will make a big difference. But this money that you have to do the best research that is good for you will be great. All the big companies are doing it. Google's and everyone else have money that the researchers think what's really good from their perspective. The only thing is your integrity to do the right thing. I think that's really important. With budget constraint, that's what I always do. I say, it doesn't matter, you gave me $80,000, $20,000, that's for me. The rest is for you. So I have a lower budget constraint. But I think it has to come from the top, to know that you really have to make the system better because otherwise you're in trouble. The other thing with respect to why saying narrative is important, you have to combine the two. Basically, we are here not, our objective is not, we are in a political world. Suppose you produce clues and they are the best clues in the world and none of your customers like it. It doesn't matter that the clues scientifically are great. What we do in economics, we get some indicators that are very important. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But you need to know what people say, who is happy and who is unhappy. The fact that your son thinks that is different than you means that there is a problem there. You need to understand who is satisfied and who is not. The point is that people all the time are surprised that that people like Trump are being elected. They're being elected because economists use all these abstract measures that no one understands, and they don't know what people think. So we really, in order to save the world, we need to use narrative and know where people are standing, rather than to have all these numbers with rate of return that only 2 rich people care about. So we need to have a combination.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Sarah, you want to do any final remark?
No, I think we already heard enough about all the speakers and reactions and comments. And so basically I think we can close here the afternoon and you can say the final few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking Sarah and the research and division within IFAD to do this collaborative work. It is not usual that we work in this collaborative manner, and that's why we really salute this effort, because we are all committed to make the system work, as quoting what David has just said, and we want to do it with integrity. But I want to thank our 2 professors who really shaken up our ways of thinking, because they question what are the issues that matter, what are we doing when conducting impact evaluations. And of course, we know that we are working against the background of hunger being on the rise. After several decades of decline, now hunger in the world is rising due to climate change and increased conflict. And our organizations are all committed to address that critical situation. And I think the work that we do with this integrity that the professors have just mentioned is addressing the various challenges of doing a rigorous work in order to improve the quality of decision making and ultimately the lives of the people that we serve. I want to thank all the participants, in particular our colleagues from IFPRI, who at the beginning really started addressing the definitions of impact evaluation, the boundaries about it, what can we understand about that or not, the important problems of design. But they also mentioned as part of the lessons learned, that it was important to understand the reality that we are addressing. And that understanding of the reality is what will really speak about the relevance of our technical work. I want to thank also Naomi Pace and our colleagues from FAO, because the social protection work that you're doing is of critical importance. Why? In IFAD, we think that every smallholder farmer has an economic potential, and we want to support that economic potential regardless the level of income that they have. That's what we, as a mandate to address food insecure groups of the society in every country where we operate, we work also with the poorest of the poor. So, but the tension between social protection and productive activities is there. And therefore, this program that you have put in place in the African region is of critical importance. And we want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience in conducting more rigorous impact evaluation in that field. By the same token, our colleagues from RIMA, I think the RIMA approach is also very, very useful contribution, and we all should learn from that. Alessandra has made really, after many years, a presentation of the long-standing effort of IFAD to measure its corporate contribution to lifting people in the rural area out of poverty, and the various challenges that we have in terms of a rigorous approach to each of the individual impact evaluations that are being conducted now, the challenges of meta-analysis and aggregating that data in a significant manner, and at the same time the projection, the challenges of projecting that data in order to really say something meaningful. And it's not just for the sake of donors that are financing this institution, but mainly for the sake of the developing countries who entrust FAO, IFAD, WFP, IFPRI, all of us to come with the collective knowledge of the international community to address these complex challenges of rural development. I want to thank again our professors when speaking about the importance not only about the end product of a development intervention, but also the process. And looking at the product and the process, that is development. That is what we do in development every day, right? Not looking at the end. Of course, by training around this table and also the almost 100 people who are following us online by webcast, we tend to emphasize the end product, right, with this results-based management framework. But we know that that is an oversimplification of reality. And in reality, if we really want to implement some change, we need to address both, the end product and the process. The process is as important as that. And there were many challenges identified by you and important innovations. I want to thank again IFPRI for the lessons that you have shared so graciously, so openly on geospatial impact evaluation. This is indeed a true innovation, because we have now tools that we didn't have 10 years back, or although they existed 10 years back, were too costly to be applied for development purposes. And we are now using them more broadly with greater advantages for the population that we work, for the countries that we work with, and so on. And I want to thank my colleagues also from IFAD, Independent Office of Evaluation, by thinking forward in ways in which not just introducing participatory qualitative approaches to more rigorous impact evaluation, but also by giving the opportunity to participants in our projects to signify, which is different. Because one thing is asking a person what do they think about the impact of a result, extracting that information, processing that information, and giving that information back. I think another feature of the SenseMaker approach is that it helps people to signify during the evaluation process what the data, the aggregated data and the trends mean for them, for improving their lives, which we thought it was innovative. And finally, again, I want to repeat my thanks to Sarah and the collaborative spirit with which we are now embarking into the next phase of impact assessment in IFAD. Thank you very much. Have a good day.